Right, and now here's a counter argument that we run into in a lot of social issues with, let's just go with within police departments. There'll be investigations as to improper behavior. That's been a huge issue here, separate from sports, and they'll look into it, and I believe that they are. There are two camps. One will be that, well, sure, they're going to look into it, but they're only looking into it because something came up. And what I don't know in that scenario is how they audit themselves, what brings it up. But I think that's where people lump it all together. And when it's self-policing and you say, look what we did wrong, we found this out, nobody tipped off the media, nobody alerted a third party that brought up this scandal, we found it, that gets lumped in with the scandalous ones, where it was not self-policing. It was identified through investigations and reporters and brought to light. And then they say, well, we're going to look into it and take care of it. How do you help guide organizations to deal with that? Number one, to show that, like you say, in, let's say, Italy and France, they're self-policing. They say, look, we're looking for trouble. We're finding it. We're fixing it. You should go be checking out the other people who aren't looking for it as closely, and therefore it's thriving. How do you help people have the confidence to do that versus saying, I'm going to look, but God, I hope we don't find anything, because they're going to really paint us as being cheaters?
It's a very interesting question, and it's hard to give you a proper short answer. But at least I can try to give you a sense of some of the things I'm trying to do in that space.
Yeah, help us understand the complexities. Yeah, I don't think there is an answer. If there was, the world would be fixed. Yes.
So first of all, I think there's an inherent conflict of interest at play in sport between promoting sport and policing sport. Unlike in the rest of society, in sports you don't have a clear separation of power in most cases. So in a democratic nation states, you would typically have a division of power along the lines of the legitimacy power. I mean, the ones making the legislation, the executive power, the ones executing and making sure that the legislation is implemented, and then the judicial power, where you can try cases of potential wrongdoings. And typically, in a democratic nation state, you would try to make sure that you separate those powers, because if you have all the three powers in one hand, you substantially increase the risk for corruption. But in the world of sports, still today, we are actually facing a situation where in many sports, the same people wear all three hats. I mean, imagine a situation where in a country like the US, where the president of the country would actually also be the president of the Supreme Court. Very interesting and thought-provoking illustration, but that's actually often what you see in the world of sport. So I think the first part of the challenge is acknowledging the power of separating powers, and the value of doing so. So basically saying we cannot allow the ones promoting the sport to also police the sport, because whenever there is a conflict, there is a tendency to pay more attention to promoting the sport than to policing it. And the most progressive sport organizations, especially the ones that have faced the recent integrity, ethics, governance-related issues, they've been able and willing to start separating those powers, so that the task of policing sport is frankly being outsourced to independent entities, only tasked to take care of that aspect in sport. No? And I think that's very helpful to keep in mind in terms of looking at the nature of the challenge at hand. Besides of that,
I was going to say,
Sorry.
I was just jotting some notes on that. That you're right. It's this these two issues of promoting and policing. That if you do it within your own organization, much like a complete dictatorship, which in the American system and elsewhere, that's how businesses are run. They are essentially dictatorships. There may be collaboration. They may have their other departments and human resources and their legal department. But in the end, there is a person or board that represents the final decision that can override all other internal advisors and move forward. And we all, historically, that's always been admired, that type of power structure. So then when we get these, the separation, and this is what you see in political systems such as the U.S., which is it's terribly imperfect and terribly messy, but that is why it's slow moving. As much, people hate change, period. But part of it is that when you see organizations that one can stop the other, but then you become adversarial, in which case then you get nowhere. It just becomes, then they'll adopt the zero tolerance, and then it's each group trying to hide something or from the other, or trying to catch the other group, or getting some dirt, if you will, on the other group to say, well, sure, they caught me doing this, but look what they did. And I think that is, like you say, that is how people are, and it's messy, but that is why we need leadership with ethics, that you're going to get into these situations to where when you find nothing, you have to look for something without being distrustful. It's just more of saying somewhere you made a mistake just because you're human. It's not because I need to exert my power over you. So I find this, and as we talk, I keep picturing it in business. I picture it in sports. Every business, every team is a little society, a little country that, in someone's mind, they've created their power structure that at some point they may fear losing. And I think that's where the zero tolerance as a way to keep people away, but knowing that if you don't, see no evil, hear no evil, there must not be any evil. I guess everything's doing well. I've scared everyone into acting appropriately, so I don't need to look any deeper. So those are my musings here on this, because, and that's why I, like you said, sports is something we all relate to. It is societal, and that's why I have people like yourself on here. This isn't about sports. It is, but it isn't. It's about what it takes us to. So I apologize for that long rambling, but you really had me just thinking on so many things over the last, 30 years of my life, when you actually kind of know you kind of see the world correctly. It's such an important topic that we can create through sport to fix the rest of society or improve.
Indeed. No, I very much appreciate your perspectives, and I'm reminded of another very topical issue, especially in a U.S. Context, where you've had many recent cases related to child abuse in sport. And for me, that's another good illustration of how sport is a reflection of society, and it also speaks to really what you shared before. I don't see it as a sport issue per se. I see it as a societal issue, and because it's a societal issue, we should expect to find it in sport as well. I think sport has a positive contribution to make in terms of showing the way forward in developing good solutions. But I don't think that sport itself can find a solution to address that challenge in society as such.
Right. I think it's a lot of pressure to put on sports. And I look at it as another one of those, again, school, sports, and those early mentors we find in the workplace together. I mean, that's the three-legged stool, if you like, that they'll cover the majority of our life experiences and support one another in really raising that bar. Again, perfection was never an option. That's what my job in the daytime is to find mistakes in the projects for my staff. And I tell them, oh yeah, I'm going to go looking for things. And when I'm wrong, it's great. If I'm harassing you, because that means you're right. But somewhere there's always something. And our job is to make sure that when our client does find something wrong, and they will, that it really is just a simple mistake. It's not a big one. And that's the goal, that we aim for perfection, but it can't be reached. We just try and get as close as we can. But teaching that in a low-pressure situation is so difficult, but it is those who had a good athletic experience. And it doesn't mean they were high-performing athletes. I can always tell who I suspect had a good experience, and later it comes out when we start talking about what they did in high school and college, or their leisure time as adults, that there definitely is a correlation between that.
Indeed, and maybe this is my chance to share some perspectives around culture in sport as well. These days, a lot of people around the world are very excited about the World Cup in football, or soccer, as you would say in the US.
Well, it's on the TV all day in my office, absolutely. Yes.
Indeed, and I think what we see at play there is an extreme pressure on the professional football players, on their coaches and others close to them. No? And eventually, I think that is part of the challenge that we need to find ways of overcoming as far as ethics, integrity, and governance in sport are concerned. You know? Because there is so much pressure on individuals to win. Nobody is rewarded for getting in second. You know? And you see coaches getting fired. You see players not having contracts renewed. And in that culture with so much pressure on performance, I think it's fair to expect, and that is also what I see myself when I look at it, that it's often ends up being a bit like winning at all costs. No? So where is the real value of sportsmanship and fair play in a context like that? It's something that people talk about. It's something that people appreciate. But at the end of the day, what matters is whether you win or not. And I think it basically reminds me of my experience in the corporate world as well, where you have often the same logic at play. I mean, what is the value attached to performance, and what is the value attached to behaviors? No? And at the end of the day, the litmus test is to what extent do you reward a salesperson who cuts corners but gets the best sales results? No? And I think in sports, looking at some of the good models developed in the corporate world, I think sport needs to find a way of balancing the two. So how do we end up effectively defining winning as a mix of excellent performance and excellent behavior, not just excellent performance? We kind of take for granted that if you're good at doing sport, you're also good at showcasing the values of sport. But I think that's a wrong assumption. And I think we need to find smart ways of attaching value, very concrete value, to behavior. And wouldn't it be beautiful if one day we would see in the Olympics or the World Cup that the winning team is actually the team showcasing exactly that, a combination of excellent performance and excellent behavior. And then obviously related to that, then the question arises, so how do we then measure and incentivize behavior?
Yeah, you made me think of this whole zero-sum attitude again. You either win or you lose. And no one will, when I tell people, okay, you find the best team in the country. Now clone them. Okay? There's another team. They have the same talents. the same skills. Have them